I don't know if you've ever had this before, where something you say can have one of two meanings, and it's so obvious to you that it means one of them, but so obvious to someone else that it means the other. Sometimes when you're giving directions, you'll say it means, you go straight, and the other person feels that maybe slightly to the right is straight or slightly to the left is straight. And there's this dichotomy of what should be the simple understanding when you're just trying to communicate with each other. You might have that with a bar mitzvah. To some people, the main facet of a bar mitzvah is the laning. I know there's still some people like that. Good to know. And other people, it's the party. I sometimes tell people, can you meet me by the shul doors? Some people think the shul doors are like the main shul. That's where the davening is. And some people say, no, it's the Friedman Sisson Hall door, outside over there. I think sometimes the question of definition or sometimes just practicality. Either way, Chanukah is quite interesting because there's also two totally different facets. It's a very rare festival in as much as they're two separate, maybe themes, separate miracles that we are celebrating. You've got the miracle of the war, that we conquered, or at least we fought off the remnants of the Greco-Syrian army. And then you've got the miracle of the oil that was supposed to last, of course, for one day, and it lasted for 8 days. Now, it's not happenstance or fluke that they are two separate themes or miracles in the Chanukah story. After all, that goes all the way back to Yaakov. What do I mean? So we have sources. The brother of the commentary called the Tur is recorded to have said, the Tur writes in Hilchos Rosh Chodesh, that the Avos, the forefathers, correspond to the three main festivals. So you have your Avram is Pesach, beginning, ignition of a nation. You've got Yitzchak being Shavuot, so that's where we're a bit more stagnant. We're tied down around a mountain, a little bit like the Akedah, we're given laws. And then you have Yaakov being Sukkot. In fact, in Vayishlach, it talks about Yaakov and Sukkot. And the Levush, another commentary, although many years later, writes that the rabbinic festivals correspond to the main Torah festivals. He says Tisha B'Av and Pesach correspond to each other. Tragedy and redemption go hand in hand, or at least one precipitates the other. They're on the same night of the week. Seder night and Tisha B'Av are always on the same night of the week in any given Jewish calendar year. He says Shavuot corresponds to Purim, the reacceptance of Torah on Purim. And he says that Chanukah corresponds to Sukkot. The Gemara actually compares the two, interestingly. And just like when it came to Yaakov, he had two themes or parts of his personality. He had the personal Yaakov and the national Yisrael. In other words, he was one of the Avos as an individual, but he was also someone who branched out to create a nation. Sukkot has two themes. The Sukkah and the Lulav, they correspond to Yaakov. And also Chanukah has two themes. You've got your two miracles, so it's not fluke. Now, the question, of course, is whenever you've got two, which is the main one? Is the main miracle the oil? Is the main miracle the war? So it's actually a debate. There are two opinions. Rashi writes the main miracle is the oil, whereas the commentary Rabbi Yonah son of Meloniel writes that the main miracle was the war. Now, of course, we're not as Jewishly expert as either of those two commentaries, but nevertheless, as an exercise in thinking, let's see if we can take a stance. If I asked you, what is the main miracle? What is more momentous? What's more long-lasting, the miracle of the war or the oil? I'm sure we'd say the miracle of the war. Independence, against all odds, beating an army, albeit the remnants of the Greco-Syrian army, but still an army, a few Jewish soldiers that were not known for our fighting skills, beating this massive army, that's massive, that's gigantic. And the oil was like this small, little, unnecessary miracle. We could have done without it. We'd have waited another 8 days. It's not a big deal. Why, according to Rashi, is the main miracle the miracle of the oil? There are a few different ways of answering, just to give you a couple of brief glimpses of approaches, and then I'm going to tell you something that is a firm favorite of mine. Some people talk about the unnecessary nature of the miracle. In other words, precisely because the miracle was unnecessary, showed an extra degree of love that Hashem has for us. Is when you do the basics, okay, that's great, you do the basics. But if you go beyond what's expected, that shows even more. That's a beautiful answer. There are another couple of answers in terms of what oil represents spiritually as well. Let's see if we can go down this avenue. We have someone in our shul, actually, whose late father developed one of the most famous photos probably in history. interestingly enough. Sometimes we picture history in photos. If I, for example, say the Vietnam War, so in your mind's eye, you're probably thinking one of two photos, right? The girl running away from the village, or the Viet Cong being I think assassinated by one of the soldiers, or the civilians, sorry, with a gun to their head. Right now, one of our members, Eleanor Kay, her late father was the one who produced that photo, which is just fascinating to think, how a photo can change, world opinion. The Vietnam War was the first war which was on mass media, and that of course led to the protests, etc. We know that lesson in terms of history and what an image can do more than just knowing about something. Anyway, if I tell you the 6-Day War, what is the image that comes into mind with the 6-Day War? I think most of you are thinking the image of the 3 soldiers at the Kotel, right? Now, the fascinating thing is that there wasn't that much fighting in the old city of Jerusalem. We actually once brought a speaker who was in the 6-Day War, in the battle for Jerusalem, or the legion which conquered it. There wasn't that much fighting, and more than that, that wasn't really the goal of the war to begin with. So here you've got an unexpected occurrence. It's not where the mainstay of the fighting was, yet this is the symbol, the photo that symbolizes the whole war. Why is that? I think the idea is as follows. Sometimes you start a process, and as you're going on that process, you might have a general aim, but sometimes when you reach the end of that process, you look back and you see, oh, 1 second, everything was leading up to this moment. Everything was geared up to this point, and now I retroactively understand the whole process. The 6-Day War was like that. It wasn't a battle for the old city, but once we conquered the old city, you saw what it was all about. You saw what was the epicenter, what was the epoch, what was the peak of this war, what was the summit? Of course, it was the old city. It was to get the Kotel, the Western Wall, back, even though that wasn't the main focus to begin with. Once the Hashmonaim fought the Greek army, or the Greco-Syrians, once they entered the Beis HaMikdash, once they rededicated the Beis HaMikdash, they lit the oil, it was clear what the war was for. It wasn't just the war of independence. It wasn't just the war to be free, although there's a certain value in that, but it was a war that we could express our religious values. Once we had the Beis HaMikdash back, we looked back and we saw, hey, this is the sum total. This is the process. This is what the whole sequence was for. And therefore, the miracle of the oil not only is the focus, but it actually shows everything leading up to it as well. Wish you a good Chanukah. It should be an illuminating one.